And welcome to a fabulous new week on Crypt. My God, the Bitcoin price just ain't looking great. But we have some news about a major exploit, which is leading to a lot of soul searching on how should we approach new ecosystems when exploits go down. Now, today we've got this dour announcement. It's coming from Balancer, one of the OG DeFi protocols. And what Balancer does is it manages stablecoins. We can see here that at 7:48 a.m. UTC, an exploit affected Balancer V2 composable stable pools. So again, these are pools that are related to stablecoins, but they do overlap with a variety of assets like Ethereum itself. Our team is working with the leading security researchers to understand the issue, share the additional findings, and a full post-mortem will be available soon. What seems to have been problematic is that this exploit, due to the composability of Balancer and its systems, did have a sort of leeching effect, or a vampirism, if you will, that while a single point was exploited, they were able to bleed into other vectors to enhance this exploit. Now, coming from Adi Flips, we see update. The Balancer hacker has included console logins on chain. There's also a good probability that the hackers vibe coded the attack using LLMs. And here's what I think. Hackers usually never leave the console log in production code. When the console log does appear on chain, it's almost always a mistake. A mistake like that only happens if the coder forgot to delete debug lines. Forgetting to delete debug lines equals copy pasted straight from an LLM. LLMs love to add console logs. Step 1 to help you follow. So when the log says garbage like done with AMST1, it's mostly AI slop. So this is a wild concept that not only are hackers seeking exploits, I mean, Balancer's been around for a very long time, but they're clearly stepping up their game using LLMs to run through the code base and essentially percolate to the top things that they can exploit. And if you want to get into the technicals of it, Adi Flips has some great stuff to follow. As always, it's in the sources. Now, Hasib, managing partner of Dragonfly, says, fascinating how different chains responded differently to the $128 million Balancer hack. Berachain had validators halt the network. Balancer very tightly integrated into their ecosystem. Now, Berachain has a limited validator set. They are indeed in their first year of mainnet, and they are in growth phase. What they did was they colluded with their validators very quickly, and this is sort of the concept at odds, which is if you can actually get this collusion together to stop something, what's to make us think that you couldn't stop my money if the courts or some sort of nation state power requested it? Now, Polygon validators censoring hackers' transactions to freeze them in place. Sonic added functionality to freeze and zero out the hacker's account. To be honest, I think these are mostly good answers. Smaller ecosystems should prioritize safety, community protection over code is law. And let's recall, Bitcoin did this in the early days. They had an exploit that minted a ton of Bitcoin, so they rolled back the chain and forked off of that. Ethereum had the DAO exploit, where they also rolled back the chain to undo the hacking of these funds. So this isn't new. However, now we have the competitive landscape. There's these Lindy chains. They're very established. Ethereum claims to have about 1 million at-home validators, so you can't really collude with these people. You'd have to get them in through a democratic process of voting. But these younger chains, they have the option of maybe using a back door. But that, of course, opens up a broader conversation as to anti-fragility. Where do we want to place our trust? Again, we don't want to trust, we want to verify. And as we move towards institutional finance, if things can be undone, that becomes very problematic to a larger institution. But at the same time, there is this notion out there that's saying, hey, look, if exploits can only come from the peak level, the tier 1 AAA experts, then how can TradFi ever get into this if basically all sales are final and they are not confident that they are the top tier expertise? In order to get on board, they technically need to be the smartest people at everything, and that becomes very problematic. So maybe traditional finance does want the capacity to roll things back. Maybe they don't. Maybe they say, if you can do that, we lose those don't trust, verify assumptions, and we have a problem here. Now, Ryan Sean Adams of Bankless, who honestly does rub me the wrong way fairly often, has a great take here. He says, maybe halting the network and freezing hack funds is a good solution for smaller L1s, as Hasib says, but consider the second order of effects. If operators of a chain can freeze funds for theft, hack, or most importantly, I think, government order, then doesn't this imply the legal responsibility for validators to always freeze funds? This is kind of the catch-22 game that happens when you do employ, or let's say reveal the hand that you actually have. This opens the door for civil and criminal cases. If you have the ability to page your duty to validators and have them freeze and you don't take it, aren't you liable? I have to think the industry splits into two types of chains. Cypherpunk, decentralized chains that don't have the ability to freeze, censor, or steal. TradFi chains, centralized chains that have the ability to freeze, censor, steal, and consider this a feature. And of course, he signs off here, hard not to be half a gangster. And that does come back to everything we've seen with Roman Storm, with the samurai wallets, which is, again, did they have the access? If they have backdoor access, if they have a everything key, a God mode, if you will, aren't they liable for mixing with any sort of money laundering, with any North Korean involvement? And that's what Roman Storm's whole proposal was, that no, he wrote the code and he launched it out there, so any money laundering was not a direct result of his efforts. And of course, we do have this recent case from Coin Center, and this is actually something I was going to dedicate an entire episode on, and I still might, because there is a lot to unpack here. This is coming from Guardy Guart that says, it's a fascinating case that few have been following and has gotten very little discussion, but maybe is worth digging into. It feels like this case could set a number of precedents going forward, although to be fair, I don't really know how that works. It seems clear that it touches on a range of topics. No validator could reasonably foresee that the actions tolerated and disciplined only by the protocol would later be treated as felonies. When industry custom and protocol rules are this clear, the Constitution's demand for clarity and restraint is at its zenith. The court should decline to let criminal prosecution substitute for the organic evolution of technical standards with an open, self-governing network. And this kind of comes down to the core of what we're doing here, which is that if we see these exploits and the courts respond to it in this criminal prosecution, that's not how we should be setting up the law for how do we build these networks in the future? How do we enact their policies? This should be coming from conversations with the builders, for people deploying this code, and ultimately coming from Congress to create new laws around these rule sets, rather than going through the Gary Gensler model of criminal prosecution and really just coming after us on a whim at any time. This just goes hand in hand with the recently released film called Code is Law, which talks about crypto's earlier unstoppable heists. Again, a lot of assets being exploited and captured by North Korea. I mean, I'm still in camp. Let's raise enough money to send Wagner to North Korea and take him out, because this is getting old. But lo and behold, in a permissionless ecosystem, we have to ask ourselves, do we want true permissionlessness where North Korea can exploit and go forth and launder funds? Because we believe that true privacy means that if that door is to be open to me, it also needs to be open to North Korea. Or do we look at some sort of middle ground where we say, well, it's decentralized most of the time, but under an exploit, under certain situations, there is a way to claw these things back. Now, remember, none of this applies to stablecoins. Stablecoin issuers can freeze those funds immediately, no matter where they are, whether they be in a self-sovereign, private key backed up kind of thing. It doesn't matter. They are centralized issuers. They can stop you from moving a USDC, a USDT, etc., etc. That is exactly why I did the piece on Bitcoin gets a stablecoin, where this is not possible because it's backed up on the Bitcoin network. Now, moving on to Bitcoin, I want to bring up this piece by Jordi Visser. I don't know if I got your name right. I'm sorry for the mispronunciation, but he talks about the market action, because a lot of people are looking at the stock market right now, which is going up and to the right. And in crypto, we're just seeing sort of this flat meandering. And that's regarding Bitcoin, not really our altcoin. They're just kind of shitting the bed. So Jordi takes on this point that this is Bitcoin's silent IPO, why this consolidation isn't what you think. And the long and short of it is he goes on to talk about a lot of companies at IPO that they spike up and then they spend anywhere between half a year to a year just kind of leveling off or plateauing. And please feel free to read this. This is in the sources. But his point is that that is a consolidation phase. When early users make those massive gains, they are going to start selling that supply. This is what consolidation is, right? Is taking that supply glut, which is coming from just a few people, spreading it over to more buyers. This means you're not seeing a price movement, but you are seeing a flattening out of ownership, a better dispersion. Again, more owners means a healthier ecosystem. And ultimately coming to the conclusion of like, look, if people were buying back in 2010 at like $100 or even $1,000, they've held through Mt. Gox, they've held through China bans, they've held through the 2018 bear market, through COVID, through regulatory uncertainty, through mainstream media calling it a scam for a decade. But the main problem here was that for a few years, the liquidity simply didn't exist. Try selling $100 million of Bitcoin in 2015, you'd crater the price. Try selling $1 billion in 2019, same problem. The market couldn't absorb it. But now ETFs are proving an institutional bid. He talks about the $9 billion Bitcoin sale facilitated through Galaxy Digital and Mike Novogratz. So what we are seeing here, and according to his philosophy, is that you now have a much broader set of buyers, which makes some of these whales more comfortable taking their exit, retaining their hard-earned wealth. I mean, $9 billion from a single seller is like absolutely insane. And he goes on to talk about how this is pretty standard in IPOs, where early employees hold a lot of shares and now they're trying to exit, and basically considers this the changing of the guard, that at present we continue to see massive Bitcoin sales from OGs, and that's why we're sort of in this consolidation phase. However, saying that it is healthy. Rather than having a few major whales holding a giant supply, it's moving over to the ETFs, which means a much broader set of owners and holders. And that this is indeed very healthy, that over time we will establish a floor, that a lot of new holders will be owning that Bitcoin, and we can resume a price goes up. Of course, I open up Milk Road here as I'm talking about this. They are a data aggregator sort of news source around crypto, and they are backing up this narrative. The reason BTC is stuck, what everyone's missing about this market, and in a nutshell, 400,000 Bitcoins sold by long-term holders in October. 400,000. And price barely moved. They go on to explain why this is bullish, and it's exactly what I just said, but let us just hold on to this concept. If people can sell 400,000 Bitcoin, and looking at it here, it's about $42 billion of sell-side demand, and we're still sticking above $100,000, well, shit, maybe that is some hopium. Maybe that is something to hold on to. I sure hope so. I'm not one of these OGs in here with $42 billion worth. I mean, one guy selling 9 bill, like fucking A. And going to Mike Novogratz and the institutional side of the business to say, hey, help us OTC this, over the counter, sell this off market. So I'm going to leave you with that little bit of hopium, that bullish bent for our goodbye. But that is to say, while this market's been largely sideways and a lot of people are getting down and out and sad and depressed, I mean, we are seeing David Sachs of the All In podcast and the Cryptos Are of the United States talking about very publicly how crypto is the future of our industry. And I'm also glad that he's pointing out that the previous 4 years under Biden and regulatory uncertainty almost led the entire crypto industry to leave the United States. Now, Sachs is obviously under Trump, and he is not talking about the Trump coin or all of the cash being used to sweeten deals towards the admin. He is talking about the reality of blockchain, the adoption of institutional finance that looks at this as a significantly cheaper settlement layer, a significantly easier way to keep record of your capital, to move it from point A to point B, and to build new primitives, to build new concepts, new technology, new ideas and applications for how they can continue to grow wealth and open it up to a broader subset. So everything remains extremely bullish. Obviously, on the institutional side, stable coins for payments, prime brokerages coming online and saying, how can we originate new investment products that stablecoins can flow into? This is all very much happening. And it is a reason to stay excited and stay in the game, even though the prices really do suck. So as always, stay safe out there. Don't over lever. Give me a like and a sub because it means everything to me. And I'll see you tomorrow.